Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Joseph Backholm, sitting in for Tony today. A ceasefire between Israel and the Islamic Jihad militant group in Gaza is holding today, following a three-day conflict that is believed to have killed 44 Palestinians while demonstrating the effectiveness of Israel's Iron Dome, the U.S.-backed anti-missile defense system, which led to 0 Israeli casualties. The action, which was dubbed Operation Breaking Dawn, began Friday afternoon following Israeli intelligence that Islamic Jihad was moving large anti-tank missiles towards the border with Israel. Now, this led to a preemptive Israeli strike and 3 days of fighting. Joining me now from Israel to discuss this is Chris Mitchell. He's the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News. Chris, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Joseph.
Tell us from your vantage point, what has been the scene there in Israel for the last 3 days?
Well, we were down there south on the border between Gaza and Israel, and very tense, very quiet, actually. Most people were indoors or actually fled the area once Palestinian Islamic Jihad began firing rockets Friday afternoon. They fired more than about 1,100 rockets over about a 3-day period. Many people, as you talked about the Iron Dome anti-missile system, we were able to see that in action. We were driving down there close to the border on one of the roads and actually saw the Iron Dome interceptors streak up into the sky. What we did is most Israelis do, we'll stop the car and you have to get on the ground. And we actually saw 7 intercepts by the Iron Dome. It's an incredible thing to see in action and in person, and that led to the fact that many Israelis were able to have, even though they had to take shelter, they were able to depend on this technological marvel to keep them safe.
Now, Chris, most of our audience has probably not been to Israel, and we hear these about these places, and we know about Jerusalem, and then we hear about the West Bank, and we hear about Gaza. Can you put this into a context of how close or how far apart these things are, these places, and in a way that Americans might understand?
Sure. You're probably in Washington right now, Joseph. If you drive 2 hours to Richmond, that's about the same distance you could drive from where I am sitting in Jerusalem down to the southern part of Gaza. Gaza stretches along a number of miles, and there's dozens and dozens of Israeli communities just within a few miles or within sight of the Gaza border, which is controlled right now by Hamas. But the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the second most powerful group therein. So if you can imagine, rockets firing from Falls Church into Washington, and what would all the people in Washington have to do? It's something that Israel has tolerated for maybe 20 years or more. By these rockets coming out of Gaza. And then also there's a huge threat up on the northern border with Hezbollah. But maybe that gives some idea of context of what it's like if you were in America and you could drive 2 hours and you'd be under threat of rockets. And when we drive down there, Joseph, you can kind of tell when you're in range. Either you can see some of these Iron Dome intercepts. Typically, it's a puff of smoke because this intercepts can track and then destroy these rockets, thankfully. But it's what millions of Israelis have been living under threat for many years.
And it's hard for Americans to understand that, where you talk about these towns that are on the border of the Gaza Strip, and their playgrounds in their public parks have bomb shelters built into them, and children are drilled like we have earthquake drills in the States. Children are drilled with what to do when they hear an air raid siren go off, so they quickly run into the nearest bomb shelter, and they are literally everywhere. We hear about this as if it's normal, but what this actually does for everyday life is just unthinkable for most Americans. And so we appreciate that context. But Chris, you're talking about the group Islamic Jihad. We're familiar with Hezbollah. We've heard about Hamas in recent years. Where did this new group Islamic Jihad came from, or are they actually a new group?
No, they began about 1981. They're a Shiite group, and they're funded and supported by Iran. So it's not just a terror group like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is all part of Iran's proxies throughout the region. Not only Hezbollah, they do support Hamas as well, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, many of the Shiite militias inside Iraq as well. So the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is just one of many groups, but this one is entirely supported by Iran, and this is sort of the long arm, the tentacles of Iran reaching throughout the region, spreading its brand of terror and its ideology.
And we understand that this latest round of conflict was initiated by a preemptive strike on behalf of the Israelis. They essentially saw troop movements along the border, and they wanted to stop that from threatening the Israeli people. Any sense of what the group Islamic Jihad was trying to accomplish with their movements?
Well, right along the border there, Joseph, there's many roads that are in sight of Gaza, and they expected maybe anti-tank missiles like a Russian-made Kornet missile could have been used to strike a school bus, civilian cars, and they wanted to prevent that. They actually locked down that area for about 3 days before Friday, and the lockdown was precipitated by an arrest they made of the top Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. That led to the lockdown. They had intelligence that told them about this terror attack in the making, and they preempted it. It was actually something they haven't done for a while, Joseph. Instead of usually it's maybe Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad that will instigate in a terror attack, and then Israel will respond. This time they took preemptive strike, and it seems to have significantly devastated the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I would also say that, Joseph, there's been 1,100 rockets that they fired, but about 200 of them actually fell within Gaza itself, causing many injuries and deaths to the Palestinians.
And that is the tragedy of all of this, is the innocent people who are just trying to live their lives on both sides of the Israeli-Gaza border, who end up being victims of this. Chris Mitchell, we are sadly out of time. There's so much more to talk about, but we will have to do it another day. Thank you for staying up late with us this evening to bring us this news.
Thanks, Joseph.